Yeah, it's annoying.
All right, so we may well be live. I'll just wait for a little signal. Oh, we're good. We're good to go. So, Mike, how are we doing?
Not too bad.
Good lad, good lad.
How are you?
We're back, session 2.
Yeah.
Mayweather, McGregor. I'm tempted to say McGregor, Mayweather, because I want McGregor to win.
Yeah.
But we'll stick with the promoted schedule of Mayweather, McGregor. We've also got Marta with us. Marta, if you want to say hello to us as well.
Hello.
Not sure you're on there.
No?
No. Oh, no.
All right, okay. Hello.
Marta's on the desk for us today, and she's going to be pushing the buttons, making sure we got the camera angles right and so on. So the intention of today's session is really just the chat. We're not going to be particularly formal about this, not least because I've got a cup of tea in my hand. But the idea of today's session is to just talk about the psychological aspect of the Mayweather-McGregor contest, which is coming up in 6 days' time as we broadcast this. And for me, this is one of the most interesting bits about it, because obviously we're going to be talking about psychology in the sense of, oh, McGregor, isn't he a confident chap, and so on, and that will certainly be part of what we talk about. But we're also going to talk about the learning aspect of this, so that sort of skill acquisition. And if you've not seen one of these before, the idea of this is we talk about kind of sports science, PE, A-level, GCSE type consideration, theory content in relation to particular events, in this case, this boxing match. And yeah, we're going to talk about those things and see what comes up. So let's make a start. So I want to introduce something to you. In fact, before we go into the theory side of this, are you sticking with your prediction? What was your prediction last week? I've forgotten what it was now.
Mayweather to win.
Points.
Don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Points or knockout. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Mayweather will win.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been watching more Mayweather videos
Mm-hmm.
since the last broadcast, and I think I'm even more convinced now.
Really?
Yeah.
So are you tending to watch the content coming out from his camp, or is it sort of more
No,
balanced?
it's more kind of older videos on YouTube. Just
I see.
About him,
You-
not necessarily related to this fight.
Yeah, he's good.
He's real good.
He's really good.
Yeah.
And he's a skillful chap, and we're going to
Yeah, he
talk a
is.
bit about that and how
Just
that's
it's
happened.
how his age is going to affect him. I think it's
Yeah.
going to be a big factor for him.
That's an unknown, at
Yeah.
least for us looking on. Might not be for him, but it is a bit of an unknown. Just to remind people, my prediction is a bold one. Mike's gone for a Mayweather to win, maybe knockout, maybe points. That gives him quite a large margin of error. I've gone the opposite way, and I've said not only is McGregor going to win by knockout in the 6th round, but I've also said he's going to McGregor's going to knock down Mayweather in the 1st round. That's quite a specific prediction. If that comes up, I reckon I will get some credit for that.
I think first 4 rounds are going to be slow.
I remember you saying that last time. So, look, one of the things I think is interesting in this, well, there's so many aspects of it, but one of the things I want to talk about is the concept of reaction time.
Mm-hmm.
You, in that last session we did, you spoke to me and you said he's so fast in with regard to Mayweather. How do you see that, and what do you see the role of reaction time being in this performance?
Well, the thing with it is you have the 2 parts, don't you? You have the reaction time, the kind of the speed it takes to notice that something is happening,
perceive it,
and then you've got the movement time. I think he was just good at both.
Yeah.
So you can't deny the bloke's fast. So I don't know. Is he just Is he just physically super fast, and maybe his reaction time is average? I don't know, he's probably just fast at both. And I guess both of those could slow with age.
Yeah, and what we're talking about there is, at least on the theoretical side, if Mayweather, say, if he's going to do, what do they call it, like the shoulder roll type movement, for him to do that, there's effectively 2 aspects of it. If we look at that in general, that is his response time. Remember, the response time, what we sometimes call reaction time, is effectively how long the information process takes, or how long information processes for, and then movement is applied. But what we're saying is there's 2 parts to this. There's the perceptual noticing the stimuli and deciding upon the stimulus what you're going to do in reaction, maybe not consciously but subconsciously, and then there's actually producing that dodge or whatever it happens to be. I can't move up like him, but
you almost looked like him. I thought he was in the room just then.
Is that Floyd Mayweather? Well, he and I have often been mistaken as almost cousins. Him and I. There are a few differences. His athletic ability is definitely the top one, because there is a distinction there. The other thing I wanted to say about reaction time is that one of the things that I've come to understand about reaction time is that when you get to sort of deeper level studying of it, it's a very, very, very specific concept. And I think this becomes fascinating in the Mayweather-McGregor contest, because clearly what we know for certain is Mayweather, in terms of responding, both his reaction time and his movement time in response to specific boxing stimuli, the triggers, the ticks that boxers will have, he is incredibly efficient, rapid, immediate at responding to that, apparently faster than any other boxer I've certainly ever seen. Yeah. But is he going to be presented with those same stimuli, and therefore his specific reactions, are they going to be functional in this contest? And I think that is at least, even if it's a tiny grey area, I think there's a grey area of doubt there that McGregor might have an opportunity based on that concept.
Yeah, so what we're saying is the stimulus that he's going to be used to is not going to be necessarily the stimulus that McGregor's going to present.
Exactly right.
So it may affect his reaction time or his response time.
Yeah, and we see that in what you might call earlier stage learners. Now, there's no suggestion, if we look at stages of learning, there's no suggestion that in boxing, Mayweather is neither an associative nor a cognitive stage learner in that theory. There's no chance about that. There's no doubt that he's definitely an autonomous phase learner. But if he's presented with a stimulus which he has never been exposed to before, temporarily, even if it's in the first few rounds, his responses to those may be slower. Maybe not so slow as it's going to go back to a novice learner, but his responses are going to be slower while he downloads and understands that information. So a good example of that is the fighting distance that I think McGregor's going to pose to Mayweather. Again, you and your karate might know more about this. I think McGregor's going to start much further out, and his attacks are going to come from much further out as he moves in. Yeah. And I think that's going to be very different to, say, Mayweather fighting Maidana, who was right on top of him, almost bear-like, trying to sort of bear him to the ground. So I think there's a difference there.
Yeah, I think so. I think McGregor's definitely going to be further out, I would say.
That's typical for karate style, right? You start really far out. And it's
really in karate we have the kind of two different parts, really. You have the kind of points kumite, points sparring, which typically starts very far out, and there's lots of bouncing around, lots of lining each other up, and then it's very rapid in and out kind of movements. And then you have the kind of more traditional sort of self-defense type element to it, which is, I think I call it irikumi. It's kind of like the contact, more kind of heavyweight boxing is more likened to that, really. So it's much closer. There's a bit of grappling involved. It's more like a boxing kind of environment. So either if you're going to be far away, then you've got to be fast to go in, score a point, or in this case, make contact and then get back out again. I don't know who's going to be better at that. McGregor, I guess, is probably going to be more used to that, I would say.
The demonstrations I've seen from a karate perspective, if you take the karate stance, is also that quite often you'll stay out, you'll go in very quickly, you'll strike and almost go past the opponent. Is that a typical...
Yeah, quite often what happens is you go in and then you retreat as fast as you can.
Okay.
Depending on what attack it is you're doing, then you might go past. But typically, if your momentum just carries you that way, generally you try and go in and out as fast as possible.
Okay. Unless
Unless you go in to a takedown, then you're obviously going to stay close. But yeah, so I guess I would say McGregor's probably more used to that kind of in and out sort of movement. There's also that idea of control of the center.
Yeah.
Who's going to be moving around the edge, using lots of energy.
I always think about that in a squash context.
Yeah, it's a similar sort of.
You've got to be on the tee.
Right.
If you're on the tee, you're in sort of pinnacle position.
You move less.
Yeah, exactly.
You fatigue. We'll cover that next time probably, but you fatigue less.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The other thing I think is interesting on reaction time, and again, come back to Mayweather's consideration here, he must be an absolute master at developing what we might loosely call the single channel hypothesis. And this is the idea that if you see the decision that the fighter has to make, I accept not necessarily the conscious decision, but if you see it almost like, what would you call it, like a funnel type model. Imagine numerous balls going into that funnel, or it's almost like it's a lotto machine and you have to get the one out, the response out that you want. And it seems to me like Mayweather is magnificent at spotting that specific bit of information out of all that clutter, which is important, and filtering it down through the funnel. So that's the one he responds to. And we call that sort of single channel hypothesis. He's got us, that's actually multi-channel, multiple possible decisions. But he's trying to isolate through brilliant selective attention the specific cue which is relevant to him. So he must be magnificent at blocking out what's around him, paying no attention to what his opponent is saying or where the referee is, but he's filtering only relevant information. And one of the things I've found out about Mayweather that's interesting is he doesn't block out everything you'd expect. So, for example, he's very, very aware of what part of the round they're in. He knows exactly what's on the clock, for example. So he's aware of the specific stimuli from the opponent that's most relevant, filtering that, funneling that through. But he's effectively ignoring everything else, but still in his peripheral attention, keeping in regard what position's the referee and how long's on the clock, whatever it happens to be. And that is some incredible skill.
I mean, maybe he is just using the information that is always using the information that he always needs to know. So if tactically, if he needs to know which part of the round they're in, maybe that's why he's developed that ability in terms of his physicality to get through the rounds, or to when he's going to attack more, or when if he all of a sudden needs to use lots of energy, but he knows he's got a whole minute left of the round. Maybe he doesn't do that.
And I think that's one of his great strengths. He starts rounds effectively and he ends rounds effectively. Often in the middle of rounds, he's kind of quite passive and he avoids being hit and what have you. And I think that's an area McGregor's going to have to really focus on. He's going to need to start and finish rounds particularly well. Because from what I can see of Mayweather, that's one of the things he does particularly well. And presumably he's able to do that. Thinking about now moving into this information processing area, he's clearly very aware of what's going on around him. The other thing, just while we're on reaction time as well, I want to talk about the importance of the feint, the fake, the sort of like throwing a dummy type concept. Because one of the things I think is going to be really interesting here is that, again, Mayweather is going to be looking for different, he's going to be conscious of different stimuli that McGregor may pose, because that's presumably one of the things he might fear going into this. Is he going to do something which I've not seen before? So he's going to be looking for that. So for me, that makes it very interesting, because if McGregor can pose something that looks different and then strike in a more conventional straight or hook or uppercut type sense, it might be one of the ways that gives him an opportunity in this contest.
I'm presuming we know that McGregor has fought boxers. Paulie Malignaggi, and presumably others. Or the part we've seen went well. And presumably Mayweather's done the same. He's got people to come in and mimic.
Apparently
McGregor. No.
Apparently he hasn't had any MMA fighters or any martial artists in there.
Well,
that's simply from one video I've seen. To be fair, I mean, it might not be reliable. If we think about that feinting or faking movement, though, the theory suggests this works on a very specific principle. So let's say, for example, I don't know, let's say McGregor keeps his distance and he moves in as if he's going to strike to the body, straight sort of a twist punch to the body. That the theory suggests that Mayweather, I don't know why I'm always looking at it with McGregor hitting Mayweather, could obviously be the other way around as well, but the theory suggests that stimulus that McGregor presents, Mayweather, if he brings it into his kind of perceptual range, that ball coming through that funnel, if he's going to respond to it, his response has to be complete before he can start a response to a second stimulus. So what that would suggest is that if McGregor can get Mayweather following feints and fake shots and dummies, then what's going to happen is that Mayweather's literally going to move in to avoid those things, potentially leaving himself open to other type of shots. And I've read a little bit that one of the possible ways he might do that is effectively around the side, sort of hook right, sort of bringing up Mayweather's left side, and then the straight left going through the middle as a potential one. And that's what we call the PRP, psychological refractory period. If he's able to benefit from that, in a sense, making the reaction to the second stimulus slower, then that could give him a massive advantage to get some shots home.
And that's why you end up with like a flurry of punches. You get that one after the other after the other. So and in karate we typically don't do that very much. It's like score the point,
one
out,
strike for a point.
And in boxing you tend to see it more. In MMA you definitely probably see it more than in boxing even.
Because it's almost like you're setting up the big shot in these sports, right?
I think it's also just the nature of it that in that type of karate bout, it's point scoring. So if you hang about too close to your opponent, they're more likely to score a point on you. And it's not like with MMA you could take a hit and it doesn't really affect you, or boxing the same. If in karate, if you get that hit, whether it would hurt you, so to speak, in real life, doesn't really matter. It's just, did they score the point or not? So we go.
Does it have to be with sort of sufficient force, or is it simply a contact?
It doesn't even have to make contact.
Oh, I see.
But it kind of it's really hard to judge, but it's the referee's discretion. But if your arm is straight and you haven't made contact, that wouldn't count. But if your arm is bent and it's like if you had straightened your arm all the way, it would have made contact. Then you could score that point.
So it's encouraging you to get into range.
Yeah, but equally it could go the other way. You can make some contact, but if you make somebody bleed or you make somebody bruised or whatever, then you're going to be disqualified. There's kind of a narrow range.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and same for kicks as well.
This might be my ideal combat sport.
It's good because you don't end up battered every time you go training.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, one of the real drawbacks of something like boxing, full contact karate, taekwondo, I'd say a little bit less to an extent because the protection is a little bit higher on the shins, on the body, on the head. But one of the problems is you can realistically only compete properly twice a year, really.
Yeah.
That's why someone like McGregor is a bit of a phenomenon, because he does tend to compete maybe 3 to 4 times a year. Yeah. Partly because his bouts are sometimes short, not always. Nate Diaz, good example.
Yeah.
But it's because of the amount of contact being achieved. So that, this comes back to the social culture stuff a little bit, but if you look at those UFC fighters, McGregor et al., all those people, they're signed to that organization, and basically they're paid per performance and the quality of their performance.
Yeah.
But really, they're limited to the number of performances they can make a year. I've watched a number of them. Donald Cerrone in the lightweight and welterweight is a good example. He tries to compete 4 or 5 times a year.
Yeah.
He's really high quality, but he will lose 2 out of 5 contests because he's competing so regularly that perhaps his preparation time and quality isn't what it should be.
Yeah. And
you don't necessarily get that in the sport you're describing.
No, because you don't have the contact element. You don't have that kind of excessive wear on the body.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to see how McGregor and Mayweather have trained, how much physicality they've trained with.
Yeah.
I'm assuming quite a lot, but they've got to just balance that with not being too battered on the night.
Not getting hurt.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? And that's where McGregor's side, I see he's probably taken a few risks on that side.
Yeah.
He's a bit of a beast, I think. He's a bit of an animal. So I think he's probably the only way he can do it, I would imagine. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Right,
I guess on the reaction time element, you kind of get into that schema theory side of things. If you're trying to increase the speed of your reaction time, then having a schema, having a kind of a block that you recognize as a pattern is really useful. So what's interesting is that Mayweather is going to have very, very well developed schemas for fighting a boxer, and that's going to make his reaction time so much faster. But he's not now presented with a boxer, so this is where the difference comes for him potentially.
Well, if we look at the sort of 2 primary theories of how movements are stored in the mind and the long-term memory, there's basically 2 ways that it's believed that it happens. One is kind of as an executive motor program, so you have a specific movement. It's still actually referred to as a generalized movement, but it's relatively specific in the sense that there's a specific motor program per movement. And those are stored in the long-term memory. So to recall that motor program and then execute it, you have to draw on something that has been specifically learned, whereas schema theory is a slightly different concept. Schema suggests a much more generalized grouping of movements into one overall, and then the performer, when they experience something which is new or different or from a different angle, they can in this case the boxer can respond in a more novel way. They can produce a more unique set of movements, it's a unique sequence that deal with the specific presentation of information. So anyone who's in a very open skill, very open performance such as boxing, constantly responding to the opponent, schema theory is a very important theory because it's all about how broad can you make that schema, how broad can you make that the idea of the movement in the mind, so that when you come to reproduce it and execute it, you have a broad range of information where you can produce something which is relevant to the specific stimuli. And with Mayweather, are his schemas broad enough for him to respond to the stimuli that McGregor is going to pose? And I think that's fascinating. I think that is almost the whole contest.
Well, yeah, I think that's what it comes down to, really.
Yeah.
Essentially, can he cope with whatever McGregor's going to bring, because it's going to be different to what he's used to, and is his schema able to be flexible enough to cope?
Yeah. And how different can it be from McGregor? It is ultimately boxing. It is ultimately the same rule set. I mean,
we have to be clear. I mean, we're not talking about a different sport.
No.
It is a different sport, but it's not it's not you're not going from golf to cricket.
No.
You know, where they're kind of very similar sort of ideas.
You're swinging something to hit a ball. Yeah.
Effectively, it's still martial arts, still fighting, it's still combat. It's going to be very similar, but with all of his experience, Mayweather may come a cropper because that experience is not necessarily going to be as relevant as it has been in the past for him.
Exactly. And look, again, if we put it into the context of transfer, we'd call that negative transfer,
Yeah.
that all of the skills that he's learned in the past are negatively influencing him with regard to the skills that potentially he needs to perform in this specific bout, this specific contest. Now, that isn't to say that Mayweather's training has not been very, very high quality before, because clearly it has. But is it going to be the weight which ultimately holds him down? Because he's so reliant on those previously built skills that he can't produce the unique skills which he's going to need to for this contest. Now, whether McGregor's good enough to press that need out of Mayweather, I'm not sure. I hope he is. I think it'd be fascinating, but I'm not sure he's able to do that. I mean, the other thing on transfer as well, I mean, how has McGregor's MMA actually transferring to the boxing environment? I mean, how effective is that? Is he able to transfer rapidly from the skills that he's presenting in that environment, the distances which he keeps between him and his performance, his agility, his footwork, his movement, his striking poses? Is that transferring efficiently enough to boxing to enable him to be successful, and more successful against arguably the best defensive boxer who's ever
I suppose if we go back to schema, if it's about having a general motor pattern, then Mayweather's only ever fought boxers, presumably. McGregor's fought MMA, and one of those fighters may have been a boxing specialist, one would have been a jiu-jitsu specialist, one would have been karate or whatever. So he in theory at least has a broader range of skills.
I think that's very interesting. Are McGregor's, for this contest, which is ultimately in the narrow confines of a set of boxing rules and in a boxing ring, will that broader schema make any difference?
They both have to adapt.
So
I guess it comes down to who's going to be the most adaptive on the night.
I agree. And again, there's a couple of other points I'd really want to draw in here. I mean, the first one we've touched on it a bit anyway is this concept of information processing. You know, let's take Mayweather for example. He has to not only react quickly to the information that McGregor presents to him in this contest, but also in order to be able to respond and to react quickly, he actually has to go through the process of taking the information which is around it and going through the psychological process of interpreting it and then outputting a relevant movement response. Now, maybe we'll just be automatic and he's so good that it won't make any difference. He's already so good. He's just gonna jab and move. He's gonna draw him in. He's gonna strike him, and then it's gonna be the usual show that we see all the time against Pacquiao, against Berto, against Cotto, against all of those guys. But part of information processing is what we call the DCR process. So the D is detection. I don't think Mayweather's going to have any problem with detecting the movements of McGregor. They might be very, very fast, but ultimately Mayweather's fast enough to detect. His perception is good enough to detect them. The second one is called comparison. Now, if those movements are so similar to every other boxer that he's got memory stored of in training, in sparring, in contests, then of course that's going to make the reaction very, very fast. And the last one is recognition. So if he recognizes, if he knows the movement that's being presented to him, then his responses and his information processing will be efficient. But what if it's not comparable? What if McGregor produces something which is so unusual to him that it slows down that process? We're all saying Mayweather is lightning fast even at 41 or 40 and a half. However, that's to that specific set of information and stimuli which a boxer presents. Now, I think it's very interesting to see whether McGregor can find some kind of backdoor hack, which is he's never been presented, or he can't compare and recognize this information, and therefore his whole information processing takes significantly longer, at which point opportunities will open up to McGregor. And if McGregor hits him, he's struggling.
I think it's that point that's making me sway towards Mayweather. I don't think McGregor can do anything so different that Mayweather can't cope with it. Ultimately, they're still confined by the rules of boxing. So if Mayweather's able all of a sudden to do something which is so innovative, so unique, why hasn't another boxer thought of it before? Maybe there is that element that he will find something. Maybe that's his brilliance.
But I think in some ways that's what I've been touching on when I've been saying things like, I think we might be about to see something iconic.
Yeah,
I could be badly wrong.
Let's hope so.
But if the thing is, if he beats him, I only see two possibilities of McGregor beating him.
Yeah.
One is what we're talking about now. He presents something so different that he can't respond in these typical ways. Those things. The other one is just physically, he's far superior. Mayweather's a very, very considered, trained athlete. So even though I think there's going to be a substantial size difference on the night, I don't think that one is going to ultimately be the difference.
No.
To me, the difference is in this arena of, can McGregor present something which slows down the perceptual behaviours of Mayweather in that environment, even if it's just for 3 or 4 rounds, in which point that's where his chance lies before.
Well, when they spoke to Paulie after they fought, he said it was very awkward. And I guess that's the kind of layman's word for what we're talking about.
Yeah, he didn't know what to do.
What is it that's making it awkward to fight McGregor? It's the fact that he's not just a typical boxer.
Yeah.
And that's then going to have the knock-on effect to the reaction time.
And that combined with the brutality and physicality of McGregor leads me to believe he does have a chance if he can present this unusual set of information which is outside of Mayweather's schema of stored knowledge, so that when he sees that, he can't respond in an efficient way as he would do normally. Now, if that happens, we are going to see something truly innovative in a sport which has existed for, I think, nearly 200 years. And if that happens, I think people should realise that is extremely rare.
Well, yeah, definitely.
You just don't get to see it. I mean, I'm trying to think of other contemporary examples of that. I think the Williams sisters and the way Williams sisters are often cited as powerful athletes. So we could talk about that concept for a lot longer. They are very athletic and powerful. I'm not taking that away. But they're also incredibly skillful, and that sometimes is overlooked with regard to those. We won't get into that conversation of why that might be right now. But for me, the impact that those two had on tennis might be comparable.
Yeah, possibly.
Trying to think of other contemporary examples. Messi in football.
Yeah, maybe. But there was always players similar to that.
There've been others.
Brazilian players, for example, who have taken that kind of beach soccer sort of very skillful approach.
Yeah, and I think, funny enough, Lance Armstrong was one in cycling, or at least it's what he appeared to be for a period of time.
Yeah.
That didn't end well. No. But maybe in some ways that Lance Armstrong one shows how unusual that would be, that in all other cases, or in his case, to even give the impression of that. There was another explanation. External factors at play. Again, we won't get into that now. Look, one of the things I think is fascinating here is, can McGregor learn boxing efficiently and fast enough in what, have they had 12 weeks of training to compete with arguably the best in the world? Can he learn that?
Yeah.
And I think we should address a couple of things.
I mean, he's not learning from scratch. You've got to remember that. He's not a complete amateur who's had 12 weeks of crash course boxing training and he's going to go and fight Mayweather.
No.
He's not that different to what he's been doing very well for the last however many years.
Yeah.
So can he? I think one of the big difficulties for him, especially when he started making the switch, is that he had to remove lots of things from his armour, from his repertoire, and to remove the use of his legs, which would have come very naturally to him. After, he would have had certain things that he liked doing, certain combinations which involved legs, elbows, and hands, and he's had to kind of remove those and unlearn almost rather than learn. Yeah. So obviously there is an element of learning to box, but there's an element of also unlearning to use everything else.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, that sort of brings us nicely into kind of sort of the notion of conditioning, because presumably McGregor, for example, when he has an opponent who's in a certain distance, certain angle, certain hand position with him, he's going to throw certain responses. So the stimulus is the opponent in this position, this far away. Well, in that case, McGregor's going to kick to the head, or whatever it's going to be, or he's going to front kick to the body, which is a technique he uses a lot. So I think it's interesting. So he's had to take the stimulus of the opponent being in that position and break the bond between that and the response of, say, a front kick. Yeah. So in that sense, he's weakening the stimulus-response bond, that kind of classic conditioning term that we refer to. And he is having to build other responses and strengthen the responses he has to more boxing-related stimuli. So I'm kind of really interested in how that process has gone, and I think again it's worth us referencing. Referencing a couple of theories here. I think. I mean, first of all, operant conditioning. It suggests to us that learning happens because people effectively we shape behavior and we learn a particular response to a particular stimulus, and that can be really effective. We know that if if a child goes near the roadside, the parent says, "Don't do that," and the child learns that they're going into the road is a negative response to that environment.
We would talk about punishments and rewards with operant conditioning, don't we? And the reward for it's not going to be necessarily
punishments and reinforcements.
Yeah, it's not going to be Kavanagh saying, "Oh, well done, Connor. That was a good." It will be the feedback that he gets, which to him is a reward if it works. If he's in close, and typically he would have used an elbow before, and he's worked out a way of using his hands for boxing, and it worked, then that's a positive reinforcement. He's going to have that reward that worked, and that strengthens the bond.
If it worked, we'd call that the knowledge of results, which is a form of terminal feedback, even if it's for an individual specific skill. I moved in this way. I didn't strike with the leg, but I came around the outside with the left, and I hooked, and I made contact with the jaw, so that it would be a knowledge of results. Another example of it would be if he went into that position and during the movement felt really strong in balance with his center over the base, and he felt he could come out quickly, that would be a knowledge of performance, that kind of more intrinsic feedback. We might sometimes call it kind of kinesthetic awareness, this internal perception that I'm in the right position.
Just that it felt right.
It felt right. It felt correct. And sometimes it's because it felt technically correct. We also have a specific form of that, which is I felt in balance. We've all experienced this if we've stood on a beam or, you tried to ski or something like that. And you're kind of just at that point where, yes, it's got, and then for me, normally it's followed by sort of a more wobbly period. But yeah, so that kind of kinesthetic awareness is a form of concurrent. So while it's happening, knowledge of performance, and many performers argue that is by far the most important. Funnily, Kavanagh, for example, John Kavanagh, you referenced there, McGregor's head coach. He's very much a knowledge of results guy. He talks about himself being an evidence-based coach.
Okay.
So that's a really interesting one because he's effectively saying, if it works, do it more. If it doesn't work, do it less. Or don't do it. And in that context, he's working very much on the level of knowledge of results. In other words, he's looking at what's gone well, what's not, and we act accordingly.
Yeah.
But
that's interesting.
Yeah, and
how would that manifest in training? Do you think for them?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they do statistical analysis. I imagine they do a lot of video review.
Yeah,
I would imagine they do a lot of video review.
Yeah.
Again, a form of visual guidance. We'd refer to a kind of video analysis, a form of video guidance. And so I would imagine they're doing a lot of that. But maybe they're doing statistical analysis. A little bit like the tennis player might have their serving percentages and how many points they've won on their backhand and forehand. They may well analyze against Malinagi, this type of shot worked particularly well, and you may contact these sort of fight stats. And if that evidence suggests that something is worth pursuing more and more, then I guess they're more likely to do that. Yeah. Now, we're kind of getting on to what we might call cognitive learning. And one of the things I think is fascinating about this is that I don't think they've had the time to go through the process of conditioning conditioning McGregor in either operant or classical style in order to develop enough responses to enough stimuli. I don't think that process had time. So I think probably what's much more likely is a year ago or 18 months ago when they first started thinking seriously they might get this contest, I think they looked at the whole in a very gestaltist way and they said, right, how do we crack this nut? How do we solve this problem? How do we beat this guy? And I think that is the way that they've approached it, which is very different from the behavior shaping way. They've looked at the end result. So this is a very goal-directed methodology. They've looked at the end result and they've said, right, how do we get there in this amount of time with this amount of resources? And I don't know if they've got anywhere near, but I think that's probably how they've approached it. Yeah. It's like a problem-solving methodology. It's like a puzzle. They're trying to solve a puzzle. They're not trying to. I don't think they're trying to train him to be the greatest boxer ever. I think they're trying to find the solution to this specific puzzle. I actually think that depending on the money, if he beats him, I'm not sure he'll ever box again.
Who?
McGregor. If McGregor beats him, I'm not sure McGregor will ever box again.
No.
Why would you?
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah.
For money. I've done it. I came in, beat the best.
Yeah.
I'll see you later.
Done.
So I'm really interested in that sort of whole learning. I mean, how does he go about solving this? What solutions can he come up with?
Well, the classic weakness, if there was ever one, of Mayweather is that he is against a southpaw.
Yeah.
Somebody with their right hand forward.
Mm.
So maybe they start with that kind of thing, that we know this potentially is something.
Yeah.
They focus on that weakness.
Yeah.
If you can call it that.
So what are the potential weakness? What are the potential advantages that he can maximise McGregor over Mayweather? So left hand back, southpaw stance, being a left-hander is one. Yeah. I think the size difference,
size and reach
are going to be one. So he's probably going to keep more distance than Mayweather's used to. I think the other one is grappling. When he gets inside, I think he's going to underhook him. I wouldn't be surprised at all if in the first round there's a clinch. McGregor underhooks him, gives him a little twist of the hip, and Mayweather literally bounces off the canvas off the top of his head. It wouldn't shock me. I mean, I don't know whether that
he might get a warning for that.
He might get a warning for that, but you know that possibility. I mean, can he exploit the clinch? I think it's very different how boxers hold each other than MMA fighters, and I think there's a potential advantage.
It kind of goes back to that deviancy point. Is McGregor going to push it in that area, in that clinch to get an advantage?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. I would have thought so.
I don't think he's got any choice. I think he has to. I think he has to take everything out of that.
Yeah.
Even if it's just tiring Mayweather.
Yeah.
You know,
I think we might see a lot of that. I think we might see a lot of McGregor trying to get in close and tie up to fatigue him.
Mm. And I think the other thing that's going to be, I mean, this is not really a performance related, but in terms of solving the problem, in terms of this sort of gestaltism, cognitive learning theory, you know, this kind of Kohler, how do the chimps open the box experiment? I think one of the things he's going to do is between the weigh-in and the fight, which I believe the weigh-in is Friday morning or Friday midday, something like that. Okay. And the fight, which I think is about 10:30, 11 at night over there. I think during those periods, I think McGregor is probably going to gain something in the region of 2 kilos.
Yeah.
I think he's going to go in significantly heavier than Mayweather. Yeah. Now, which might slow him down a little bit in terms of his movement, but in terms of then the clinch and the physicality in the clinch, I think that's where he might be thinking, I've got a possibility of exposing this particular weakness. And, you know, I guess the other one is trying to exploit him psychologically.
Yeah.
You know, can he upset him? Can he get inside his head? Can he get Mayweather to do something he wouldn't normally do? Has he done that already? Hear Mayweather all the time saying, I'm going to come forward and box. I don't believe that for a second.
No.
Doesn't make any sense to me at all. But can he get inside his head enough to really force him to change his behaviour?
I think the psychological upset from either side could be the determining factor, really. Because they both absolutely believe they're going to win, each one of them.
There's no question.
And they're both completely confident. I don't actually believe that there's any sort of... Most of us, I think, have this sort of nagging thing in the back of our mind, even if we appear confident, like, but you might not win. And I was always taught, my dad always taught, to go into a fight like that. Just believe you're going to win. Even if you know you're not, or even if you don't think you are, but just believe you're going to win. Yeah. And it gives you a certain confidence. I think these two guys are slightly different. I just think they just have the positive belief they're going to win, and there's no nagging voice in the back of their head.
Yeah.
But one of them is going to be wrong.
Yeah. If we come to that sort of confidence point there, I mean, confidence is a distinct feature of this fight, because both of them are, to a point, obnoxiously confident sometimes. I personally find it quite charismatic, at least from one of them, not necessarily from the other.
And you have to take out of that the social side of it, the cultural side, which is that they are putting on that show in order to sell tickets, to sell pay-per-view. And when you watch some of the other videos, more private videos of them talking,
they're basically nice guys.
They come across like that. So there's a certain a falsity to it, if you like, to the tour promotion. And
one of the things I find really interesting about McGregor again is if we look at Bandura's model of self-efficacy, a couple of the precursors of high levels of confidence, I don't know where he's getting them from, because one of them is Vicarious Experiences, which basically means that you're watching a model, someone a bit like you, achieving or doing this thing, and you're able to model that. Well, where's he getting that from?
I know. I was thinking that last night. There was nobody like that when he went into the UFC.
Nope.
In terms of his his nationality.
No. Even his style. I mean, the
yeah.
whole sport had moved into a much more kind of strength and conditioning rather than classical martial arts type style.
Yeah, I don't know where he's getting that from.
And the other one is called performance accomplishment, or one of the other ones called performance accomplishments.
What you've achieved in the past. Yeah,
and he's never boxed professionally.
I think the thing about him, the thing he does is takes the previous accomplishment that he's had elsewhere and applies it to what he's going to do in the future.
Yeah,
he must have done that when he moved up a weight. I was successful in the lower weight. I'm going to be successful in the higher weight. I've done that twice. I'm going to be successful in boxing.
And he's prepared to create novel and new patterns with what he's doing. And I think that's a really fascinating thing. And it's partly on the skill side that he's potentially going to produce new movements, new techniques, new skills, and they're going to be something that causes Mayweather a problem. But it's also the fact that he's going to create a new niche and a position for himself, and he believes in it enough. From what I read about McGregor, he talks about visualization as a very key process in this. And I find this such a beautiful idea, though I've never seen in my own life to find the time to do this myself. That the theory is that if you visualize something, okay, consciously you know it's not a real thing. Consciously you know it's part of your imagination. So if you close your eyes and maybe McGregor pictures him, whatever he sees, consciously he knows that's in his imagination. But the deeper, more animalistic, sort of the older brain and the subconscious, as far as the subconscious is concerned, is that experience is absolutely real.
Yeah.
So on that basis, McGregor is almost creating his performance accomplishments, at least in his subconscious. He's able to visualize with enough clarity, enough vividness, is that the right word? Enough color, enough scale. And apparently the more bright and colorful visualizations are, the bigger they are, the more likely they are to be positive and effective. And so on that basis, he must be very effective at doing that. And that is having an impact, as Bandura argued, on things like those performance accomplishments. Okay, I've never fought Mayweather before, but in my subconscious, I've fought him 1,000 times and beat him every single time. Yeah. And I think that's a fascinating...
And he lives his life like that,
correct.
Apparently. I don't know, but apparently he lives his life. You know, he was saying that he would drive in his old car, when he first started, he'd be driving his old car down the road, and in his head he was driving his Bentley. And all the flashing lights were not the lights of the town he lived in, Ireland, it was the lights of Vegas. It was New York. He was already traveling around the world before he'd even left Ireland. Yeah. And I think he genuinely just lived his whole life like that. So it's not just, he didn't waste any time in that respect. He wasn't just training for X amount of hours a day, because outside of his training, he was visualizing, he was imagining himself either in the ring, either fighting, or the life he wanted to lead. And over a number of years of just living that in your head, living that life, that has to have some impact. Maybe it's kind of that law of attraction. That's
exactly it, the law of attraction. I've heard about a business guy called Dan Pena, who I don't necessarily recommend you Google, because his language is absolutely foul. But but he's an interesting guy. And
it's that idea that what you picture, you're going to attract towards yourself. If you picture negativity, you picture,
and what you put out as well. If you put out those negative, and interestingly, I mean, whether it's just from the sales perspective, Mayweather has been repeatedly saying, I'm older, I'm not as fast, I'm not who I was before. McGregor this, he's a good fighter, he's powerful, all on paper, everything's on his side. Now, he's probably just saying that to make people believe there's a contest, and therefore people should buy it and should watch it. But is that filtering into his subconscious? Yeah. There was something interesting the other day where he actually had a Freudian slip in one of his interviews. And he meant to say go
Mayweather.
Yeah, he meant to say go to him. He was referring to his intention to go and fight in the middle, and to go and meet him in the middle, and to have effectively to sort of to swing it out, as it were, in the middle of the ring. But instead of saying go to it, he initially seemed to say go down. I thought that was an interesting one, because he corrected himself very quickly afterwards. Whether Freud was right, and this is the leaking into the conscious mind of the subconscious beliefs and ideas, who knows? Maybe. I might be clutching at straws here, but I thought it was an interesting. I thought it was an interesting idea. One of the things I find fascinating about the entire competition that they're going to have is what we'd call the competitive orientation. So imagine we were talking about to badminton players, to soccer players, to American football players, whatever. They would be able to go into a contest And they could judge themselves and how they've performed and how they say their teams performed in a whole range of ways. So they could say, right, we lost today, but my first serve percentage was 5 points higher than my last one, and I actually hit through my backhand far more frequently than I do typically. So I'm really happy with that aspect of performance. In other words, they're able to judge themselves on kind of process level information, because of course they're probably going to have an equivalent match, if not the next week, the next month, or sometime soon. In this case, the only thing that they can judge themselves by is winning and losing. Yeah. It's 50-50 at best by definition.
The learning that takes place is negligible. In terms of its importance.
Yeah, because this contest presumably is going to happen once. And because it's going to happen once, the only competitive orientation which is of relevance is, did I win or lose? Yeah. And that I think is fascinating, because it means that, again, we come back to that point with McGregor. It doesn't really matter how he wins. Yeah. I guess they want to entertain and this kind of stuff, but ultimately they want to win. So the processes that lead to that could be anything to achieve that winning, which is, again, we talked about gamesmanship a little bit last time, but I also think about the individual that loses this contest. I think it's going to do a massive amount of damage with them. A lot of people I've heard say McGregor loses it, he's got nothing to lose. I utterly disagree with that. I think this would do unimaginable damage to his sort of self-perception, even if it's only temporarily, because of the way he sees himself and the way he builds himself and the way he represents it and the way he... So for me, this is a very, very serious moment for both of them. Yeah. Mayweather as his sort of parting moment. Yeah. And for McGregor, because he's presumably got another 5 or 6 years of competition to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how he goes back to, or if he does. I assume he's going to go back to UFC after. And I suppose it said that the learning is negligible, but if anything, he can take something away from it and take it back to what he's going to do next. Yeah, Mayweather's going to be done after this. He's not going to come back from retirement again to fight somebody else. He's going to retire.
Unless it's a rematch, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of interesting.
I think on the competitive orientation, it kind of, again, it throws up that idea of how can they, inwardly, can they be as confident as they seem to be?
Yeah, I think they are.
You really think so?
Yeah.
I can't think about that. They must know the possibility. McGregor must know the possibility of losing, as they has to, doesn't he?
Maybe
this is what makes him a genius. I don't know.
I don't know. I think if it is, it's smaller than it is for most people.
Oh, definitely. I agree with that. But if, for example, if they were going into that contest, let's just imagine boxing was more of an Olympic type style, and he was going into that contest and he was thinking, right, my objective is this contest. I'm going to get my front foot, my right foot on the inside of my opponent's left foot. I'm gonna strike to the body 5 times in the first round, and once the dangerous right hand of my opponent comes forward, I'm gonna slip and I'm effectively gonna take him to the clinch. That minimizes his effect. A performer would go in very confident into that environment because every bit of that is completely within their control. So for me, controllability is a very interesting point here, because even if McGregor goes out and performs perfectly for his skill level, Mayweather could outperform him, and vice versa, theoretically.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing for me, is the vice versa is what takes over. So McGregor's not thinking, he's not thinking about what if mine's not good enough, what if my skill level isn't high enough. He's thinking, I'm bringing something totally different. I'm going to outclass him. I'm going to outwit him because it's going to be different, and I can punch hard, and I'm fast, and I'm in the peak of the prime. He's old. I think it's all of these positive things that he's thinking about, and it doesn't leave much room for the negative, niggly, I might not actually do it. I don't think that comes into it very much.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
And I wonder how much they train themselves that as soon as that thought starts to creep in, just to get rid of it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of videos of Mayweather training, and he's talking, not just quietly to himself, he's just shouting, talking to himself.
Like mantra style.
Yeah, mantra, exactly.
Yeah. And we'd call those two things, like, the positive side is what we call positive self-talk, and we can talk about mantras within that as well. Sometimes it's a repeated phrase. Could be all kinds of things. Could be about emotional control. It could be just the repeated phrase of breathe. I remember reading about Michael Vaughan, a cricketer, ex-men's England cricket captain, and his one was watch the ball.
All right, okay.
Watch the ball.
Yeah.
Nothing else matters.
Yeah.
And I thought it was kind of an interesting one.
Yeah.
So that positive self-talk reassures and makes them believe more in what they're doing. The other one is what you referred to before, negative thought stopping, is that as soon as that negative it might not. It doesn't even come in that far.
Yeah.
You block out any of that negativity. And again, this comes back. We mentioned it, I think, in the last show. We talked a little bit about sort of the notion of flow and peak flow. One of the characteristics of 6 cent Mihai's theory, not all of them, it's a much broader construct, but one of them was that anxiety and arousal at the right levels for the performer. So generally speaking, there are exceptions for individuals, of course, but what we're talking about here is we're saying that for McGregor, I'm going to approach from his side because I effectively want him to win, and I hope he does well. What he needs to do is he needs to get his somatic or physical arousal, his kind of that sort of buzzy excitedness. He wants to get that just at the right level, so it's peaked but not gone over. So he's not shaking, he's not nervous. He can still perform as he needs to perform. He's still calm under the lights. He still walks out, and his breathing is still normal. All these kinds of things. So physically, somatically, he's aroused, but he's calm.
Yeah. And
the idea is that on the cognitive side, the cognitive anxiety, things like negative thoughts, worrying, doubt, self-limiting beliefs, that those should be at 0.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that something like physical arousal and physical anxiety can actually be very, very positive. But when you come to the cognitive side, the idea is to suppress that. Like that should not be in that mind. And for me, it's a nice idea, but you can only do it, coming back to the point we made a moment ago, if you truly believe you're going to achieve what you're aiming to achieve. And I still don't know if McGregor truly believes that.
No. Does Mayweather?
I think he has to be. I think he does. I guess he has the doubt in there. I guess there's the possibility in his mind. But he's got so much to fall back on.
Yeah.
McGregor just doesn't have that to fall back on. Again, coming back to that pre-performance accomplishments of Bandura, he doesn't have that to go back to. Or does it? Or does he see it complete? Does he literally see the world in a different way to the way I see it?
Yeah, I think he does. I think he sees that his previous experience is absolutely what he needs, and he doesn't need the previous boxing experience, because the thing that's going to give him the advantage is that he doesn't have that.
That makes him a dangerous man.
Yeah,
very dangerous.
Yeah. Who's most anxious going to this? But no doubt they're both going to be.
Me.
They're both going to be. They're both going to be nervous.
Yeah,
they've both got an element of nerves.
Yeah, they got it right.
Surely.
I think Mayweather's most anxious.
Got more to lose.
I think he's got a lot more to lose.
Yeah.
I come back to the point. I think a loss is devastating for both.
Yeah.
But Mayweather's entire being
he's got the
built
weight
around this persona.
Yeah, and he's got the weight of the sport on his shoulders.
Yes, he has.
If he loses,
looks bad.
Bad for him and bad.
He
for
can
boxing.
say I'm old and grey. He can.
But he's not that. He's not that old. He's not that much past it. Yeah, 2 years ago or something, he retired.
So for me, the anxiety.
More
if there are any doubts, or if there's any worry, not doubts, that's the wrong word. If there's any worry,
yeah,
it might only be a small nagging worry that I don't really think this is going to happen. But what if it did?
Yeah,
I think that's got to be with Mayweather, hasn't it? I guess the only real loss for McGregor and the UFC and MMA, I guess, if he just got boxed out, if he just got humiliated in skill level, I think that would be the only.
Yeah,
it would only look bad.
Yeah, that would crush, because he's been saying how good he is all the way through. So it would look a bit stupid if he just got completely outclassed. Yeah, I can't imagine that's going to happen.
That must be what Mayweather thinks is going to happen.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
It's going to be very interesting. I think we have to touch on attitudes here as well. So, like they clearly both got incredible attitudes towards their sport. I mean, their perseverance, their longevity, their training, their commitment, absolutely phenomenal. So we're clearly looking at very positive attitude construction here. But our theory suggests there's 3 parts to that attitude, right? So the first part is what we call an affective part, AFFECTIVE. Spell that right? Affective.
Yeah.
Affective.
Yeah.
So affective relates to feelings. What are your feelings towards, in this case, the challenge, the opponent, the contest? So they've got that sort of emotional part. They've got then their beliefs. And this is why I think what we talked about is fascinating, that C element, the cognitive part. Presumably McGregor knows he's put everything humanly possible into that training. So he knows that. So no matter win or lose, he knows he gave it everything. He knows he thought about it as much as humanly possible. That must give him a lot of positivity and a lot of belief. And the other thing is then the behavioural part. So the behavioural part is on McGregor's side, perhaps, that he's utterly committed to training. He's training 8 hours a day. He's nutritionally superb. He's going to be well rested, well recovered, well adapted. He's going to have tapered. He's going to be peaking. He's going to go into that fight, and he's going to be able to, his behaviours, his stress management is going to allow him to control all of that anxiety. So that would be a very positive. Actually, one of the things I find interesting is on Mayweather's side, on that cognitive bit, how does age fit into that for him?
Yeah,
it's got to be a nag. It has to be, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, you would think so.
Yeah,
you would think so, but I don't know. I said this in the last time. If anything, his age is just going to affect his speed, and I think it just brings him back down to McGregor's speed.
But again, the speed we talked about right at the start, it's specific, right? Or the responsiveness, the reaction, the agility, the amount of time it takes to process the information. This is specific.
Yeah.
It comes back to that start point we made, the initial point we made.
Is the stimulus going to be...
Can he present something new, something novel? I think that's what it comes down to. Because if he can't, he loses.
Yeah, he can't go in and box.
No.
McGregor can't go in and box. He's got to do something slightly different.
Yeah.
Whether that's in the clinch, whether that's in the distance that he presents, whether it's something novel in terms of the techniques, the patterns he's going to put to Mayweather. Something's going to be different, and I suppose that's what it comes down to. I think really, is that enough to just take the edge off of Mayweather?
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation. So we're going to talk about the physicality side, the physiological side of this when we speak on Wednesday, and we're going to talk about notions of training and fatigue and fitness and all of this kind of stuff. But for me, this is where some of the real nitty-gritty is in this conversation. The thing I wanted to touch on as well, we talked about that emotional control a moment ago as well. On that emotional control, I mean, we look at the concept of arousal. Both of these performers seem to go into this very pressurized environment, sort of icy cold.
Yeah,
that's what I see. Both of them are very, very composed performers. So they're clearly using a number of the techniques. We're talking about. Oh, excuse me. Negative thought stopping, visualization, mental rehearsal, positive self-talk, all that kind of stuff. But also, I mean, what kind of profile do they have, and how have they developed? I personally don't think it's an innate thing. That's just my personal perspective. But how have they developed this sort of psychological profile which allows them to be effective in that environment? Because anyone else going in there would be flustered and nervous and worried. And this, how have they developed that profile? What processes lead to that, and how can that be developed in other athletes? I'd really like to sit down with either of them and talk about that. It could be a fascinating conversation, because if you look at a lot of the arousal theories, they're suggesting that a more experienced, that a grosser skill, striking, these things require a higher arousal level, but both of these seem to suppress that arousal really, really effectively.
I guess it's the balance, isn't it, between the arousal leading to some sort of the gross movements being in the way they want them to be, powerful enough and with enough force, but at the same time, don't underestimate the subtlety of the art of boxing, or the delicacy, or the accuracy. It's those small things which, if you imagined a golfer putting, we would say they would want their arousal to be as low as possible, very calm, very composed, very slow breathing. That's to be accurate, presumably. But these two need the same level of accuracy with 1,000 times more force. It's that kind of balance.
I've often thought this on a philosophical level. I've put it in a number of our videos as well when I've recorded them. I think in some ways this represents really the art form of what sport is. Yeah. That you can take, whether it's gymnastics, boxing, sprinting, whether you can take the gross and the fine and find the perfect setting in between. So the gymnastics performer or the ice skater, let's take the ice skater who goes for the biggest spin or the biggest toe loop or whatever they call. I'm not into that sport, but whatever they can perform, but they do it to a point where they control it to the perfect technique in that fine, accurate, small, intricate movement which they need to produce. They
also bring in elements of fatigue there as well. If your arousal's too high and you're too tense, then you're going to fatigue faster. So these guys if they're going to go the full 12 rounds, say, and they get half an hour into the fight and they've got 6 minutes to 2 rounds left, 6 minutes left, they need some of that energy conserved.
Yeah.
And that relaxation, going in nice and calm and icy cold, is what's going to do that for them, and not allowing them to be too physical all the way through, too tense.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, again, both of these are they absolute masters at, having relaxed shoulders, allowing the fluidity of the shot. I've heard numerous times in the last week of McGregor quoting Bruce Lee, who would have talked about this endlessly, presumably, if he'd been alive today and we had more access to him. And I think he sees himself as a bit of a modern day Bruce Lee, funnily enough.
Yeah, well, I like that about him. I like that he refers to himself as a martial artist.
Yeah, I do as well.
Partly for me, I guess, growing up as a martial artist didn't have that. I think it had a resurgence in the sort of Bruce Lee era.
Yeah.
Whenever that was, 60s, I guess.
70s.
70s.
When was Bruce Lee martyr? Find it on Google. Sorry, you're getting really bored there. We're not asking you anything.
I guess 60s, 70s, it had a big resurgence, and then it sort of died a death a little bit, I guess, in terms of its popularity.
Well, it's Karate Kid.
Yeah.
Came back a bit there.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think boxing's had the opposite of that. Maybe it's the effect of the Olympics or whatever it is. It's more of a sport than a martial art. But I like that McGregor refers to himself as a martial artist. I think that would do only good things for martial arts.
Yeah, I agree, and I think he's a very grounded, balanced martial artist. When you hear him speak away from the bravado and the bullshiness of his kind of trash talking, he speaks beautifully as a grounded martial artist. Go on, Martha. So Bruce Lee in the Bruce Lee in the 70s. Okay, yeah. 1973 he died, did he? Okay, all right. So I didn't realize it was that long ago. Actually, he died before I was born. So it's quite
a long time ago.
It's quite a long time ago. Look, sort of $1 million question here, Mike. I want your opinion on this. I think it's fair. It's clear to see both of these have got personalities that are well suited to their performance, their style, and what they do. Where does that come from? What this mystique and charisma that both of these performers have, and their tendency to approach with such dynamism and massive attention to detail when they come to their training. I mean, where do these personalities develop? Where do you put your flag? Do you believe it's an innate thing?
No. A
learned thing? Something in between? Where do you see it?
I think it's learned. And when you look back at McGregor when he was in school, he was very open about the fact he was bullied. He was very quiet. He was very shy. He was nothing like the person that he presents himself as now. So if it was innate, then surely that would have manifested itself from a much earlier age. So, I very much sit in that camp that it's environmental and it's learned as opposed to innate.
Well, that's annoying because I also have that
we don't
perspective.
Have anybody in the other corner.
So we haven't got anyone in the other corner. I'll give you my perspective, my personal view, both through the reading that I've done, the teaching I've done, and also through my experience of the world, is that personality is entirely learned.
Yeah.
Not 0.1% is it innate. That's my personal opinion. I'm not saying I'm right. It's just how I've experienced things and what I've seen. Now, a lot of people would disagree with that. But I personally believe if you look at, let's take McGregor, if you look at McGregor and the personality traits and the behavioural sets that he's developed, but first of all, I would just deny there's a concept of the personality in the sense that there's this setting that we return to. I think it's an evolution of a series of thoughts, ideas and behaviours which can be influenced all the time externally.
Yeah.
Where someone might differ from me is that I'm saying it starts at the blank, almost like someone is an essence at birth and they can mould themselves and be moulded into literally anything. And not everyone agrees with that. Some people believe there's 10% innate character, 50%, 70%, who knows. My point would be I think this is learned. And again, for me it becomes interesting because that then means that McGregor, Mayweather, choose your favourite sportswoman or man and how they approach their sport, that person can be developed. Yeah. And I think that's a very, very interesting idea. So even in my personal opinion, even if it is 10% innate, it's the bit I'm not really interested in anyway. Because what I'm interested in is developing a series of behaviours, someone which really are functional for their lives, and that there's no limitations on that.
Yeah, and maybe that's a product of where we've come from in terms of career teaching. Yes. You're in that development business, building people up. Maybe that's a product of that. If you're in different, I can't think of one right now, but different career, if you were doing something else day to day.
Well, what about you? I mean, you've got a young daughter with so presumably with whose character is more and more being presented to you as parents. How do you see that?
Sort of developing a character. we describe her as feisty quite all the time. Yeah, she knows when she wants feeding. And
what fits into the feisty category? What behaviours?
Knows what she wants. If you're feeding and you take the bottle out for too long, she wants it back and she'll grab and reach for it and cry. And but she's also very smiley, so you could interpret that she's got a kind of a cheerful personality, or she's particularly happy. Hopefully she is. Hopefully she's comfortable. But I'm not sure. It's interesting to see how that's going to develop. Will she be that feisty, cheerful person when she's 10, and then again when she's 20 and 30? And for me, it just depends on what happens to her over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
As to whether she's going to maintain that or be somebody completely different.
I mean, if we look at more classical theories of personality, I mean, the traditional view, if we go back 100 years, the traditional view was personality was like talent.
Yeah.
You were born with it or you weren't.
Yeah.
You were born with the good one or another one.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
So we would, well, not to speak for you, but we would both argue that most of talent is not innate either.
Well, I'm going to correct you on that.
Okay.
I don't think any talent. I've seen personally. Yeah. I'm kind of extreme sometimes. I have some. I'm trying to choose my words carefully. I don't mean extreme in sort of notion of extremism as we use it today, but as far as that continuum goes, I'm extreme in that sense that I just don't acknowledge talent. I think there's certain physical and biological traits, such as being 6'7" is going to help you in basketball to be a strong forward. Of course, I do think there are physical capacities such as quantity of hematocrit, for example, shape of your frame. Mo Farah. So I'm going to call him Mohammed Farah because I know he said he wanted to be called that recently, and he's not going to listen to this. But I'm going to respect his view. Mohammed Farah, for example, the fact that he is, I met him. He's a really lovely man, actually. The fact that he's 5'6", the fact that he's got a very narrow frame but is muscular around that frame, and he has a very high hematocrit naturally, lends him to being an endurance runner.
Yeah.
Now, I can't ever compete with that because my shoulder width is double his.
Yeah.
I can't, no matter how hard I trained, I couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah. You can see it in the physical things. So when we look at sport, people find it difficult to see talent as something that you can ignore.
Yeah.
And it's in a way it's kind of hard to just completely ignore it for those reasons you just said. The learning element is, you almost can't see it anyway because you can't see that learning taking place. You can't necessarily yet maybe measure the level of or the strength of the neurological connections in the brain, for example.
Yeah.
So it's less quantifiable. It's easy to look at somebody tall and say, well, they will probably be a better basketball player if they practice the skills and the fitness, etc. So the learning element is more difficult.
Yeah, I agree. But I take psychological processes really. I mean, one of the things we can be really confident about is that the brain is definitely plastic in the sense that it can be developed, it can be grown, it can be developed. I guess for me, it comes back to a philosophical stance, and that is to say that let's say that there can be 10% difference between this infant at birth or when does the brain start developing in the womb? I don't actually know, but whenever the brain starts developing, maybe this one has 10% more capacity for faster, more rigorous thoughts than this one, and 90% is learned and developed through behaviors. Well, the thing for me personally is I'm not interested in in that 10% because I can't influence it and I can't maximize it. So for me personally, it's also about what's relevant, not just about what's real. So the fact for me that the kind of, let's say, the 10 or the 20 or the 25% of talent, if somebody wants to recognize it as that, whether that's real or not, I don't care whether it's real because I'm just going to thoroughly ignore it.
If you can't do anything about it.
Can't do anything about it. So it fascinates me that so many of our social and cultural and systemic models are built on talent. Education is one of them. We literally have a talent model in education.
Yeah.
And the fact that we do that I find it very difficult because I don't think it has any relation to the education of a young person whatsoever.
No.
So it's a tricky one. Anyway, we're off the
slightly off topic.
So you would be very much on the social learning side. So Bandura for you, Bandura social learning theory.
Yeah. Environment's important.
Environment,
role models.
B is a behavior as a function of environment.
Yeah.
And of course, it's probably good for us. We mentioned, Freud, Eysenck, those guys would very much see themselves as trait theory. They would have if they still breathe. They would see themselves as trait theories, that a character is born and it remains. It's permanent, it's consistent, it's enduring, it's stable type traits, and those traits perpetuate themselves across a whole range of behaviors. So theoretically, a great leader in business could be a great leader on the sports field, and so on and so on and so on. And then, of course, we've got the interactionist theories, which suggest that behaviors and therefore personality are a product, I should say, of both innate traits and personality at birth and what we experience in our environment. And it really is whether we are in the outer layer of Hollander's role-related behaviors as to whether we'll behave like our kind of core personality or not. So it kind of helps to explain how someone who can seem very passive and quiet and calm in everyday life can cross the white line or go into the boxing ring or whatever and be an absolute savage.
Yeah.
And it kind of helps to explain that role-related behavior in that environment. So these kind of concentric rings of Hollander help us with that. We've got the central core, which is the psychological core, the typical. Then we've got the next is the typical responses, mostly reflecting that psychological nature. But then people can behave differently because they're in a specific role in a specific environment. And of course, that lends itself to the environmental. So we'd label that as B equals FPE, behavior as a function of innate personality and the environment.
Yeah. Wow.
So I went into teaching.
Well done.
Went into teaching mode there, didn't I?
Swallowed a textbook.
I'd be very interested to. I mean, I don't know. I'd be very interested to know how other people see the personality concept.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting. I find generally our society teaches us the trait model, but in my opinion, the reality is the environmental model.
I think so. I'm on that side of the fence.
Yeah, definitely with me. So, predictions changed at all, Michael?
No, I haven't got any money on it, but if I had, it would be in there's Mayweather.
There's not much point putting any money on McGregor anymore. It was back. Do you know what I'm really frustrated with? And Marta, who knows me quite well and spends quite a lot of time with me, will confirm this. I was predicting that this fight was going to happen. How long ago was I predicting that this was going to happen? Do you want to say that on there? Because I want the proof. Yeah, it was a year ago. You reckon as long as a year ago? So a year ago, I was predicting this was going to happen. And this is, imagine, right, if this happened, if I'd have put a bet on then, but it was going to happen, down in the first, knockout in the sixth, what would be the odds for that?
Well,
that would be...
If you did it, you could be... you probably wouldn't be as rich as him.
No. But it'd be a good one, I think.
Yeah.
It'd be a good one. I don't gamble.
You could get a Tesla.
Have I been mentioning that? I don't gamble at all, so it would be... I don't even know what you do inside a betting shop.
No.
I don't even know how it works.
No, nor do
I'd have to ask for guidance.
We struggled on the quiz machine in the pub once.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose that is gambling ultimately, isn't it? But yeah, I'm going to stick with my prediction. I'm going to
down in the first.
Down in the first. Well, my overall prediction is McGregor by knockout, but we're going to put the detail in there of down in the first.
Yeah,
and I think it'll be a technical knockout, TKO in the sixth that you just can't. I don't think
carry on.
You just can't get up, or he's done.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm going to repeat what I said before. I'm just going to mention the right eye of McGregor as well.
Yeah,
he has a tendency to cut on his just above his right eye here. Just a possibility. We'll talk a bit more about the physiology of that tomorrow on Wednesday. And then the only thing to say really is that we're gonna do one further broadcast on this, which is we're going to look at the physiological elements. I'm looking forward to that. So if you like kind of studying or thinking about kind of deep muscle structures and thinking about protein contraction within muscle fibers, we're going to cover that a little bit on Wednesday. But more importantly, we want to talk a bit more about this kind of fascinating contest and see where that can take us. Any final thoughts from you guys? Anything you want to add psychologically? Well, I'm going to kick myself afterwards that we missed some stuff. Yeah. Marta's like, no, just get it done. finish it. I've had enough. So no, that's fine. I'm sure there's stuff. We didn't talk about guidance. Oh, they know that, don't they? It's easy guidance, isn't it?
There's another video on that.
We've got videos on that. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll finish there. For anyone who tuned in, I don't think we've had massive numbers or anything like that, but hopefully this will get a bit of attention afterwards as well. And
last week's video had 30-something views by
yeah, I've got a few. I mean, Yeah, I'm going to put a few little sections of this, edit it, and put it out as well, and do that. And look, it might be a longer, slower burn. We'll see. I don't really care. I'm not doing it because it's going to get a lot of views. I'm just doing it because it's interesting for us, and we're learning a bit about this process of recording and have a little mini studio and these daft things and what have you. So we're learning that process, and I don't really care what anyone else thinks, to be honest. So yeah, I'm enjoying myself. So that's all that matters to me.
Yeah.
All right, good stuff. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Anyone, especially if you stayed in for over an hour, appreciate it, and look after yourselves.